This is an interesting area, and also, I should say, this is a moral area. And when we're talking in terms of human morality, we're talking in terms of subjective choices, which each and every one of us has to make on our own path through life. And therefore my morality might not necessarily be the same as your morality, but if there's anything to be gained from the insights I might shed, then that's good. The question here is about the nature of what Burke was calling evil, and also about what can be done about it. Now, I'm not actually one who believes in evil as such, but in a sense it's there anyway. I'm one of those who looks on evil from the viewpoint of that it's the word live reversed. But I'd like to look at this notion of evil first, because the trouble is that it's clouded very much by our cultural value judgments, which have been particularly set in motion by a Christian or an ecclesiastical past, which goes back centuries and centuries. And we've been brought up with the whole idea of good and evil, although we don't think about it that much, really. And I think there are some misunderstandings as a result of our ecclesiastical history and the whole background of so-called good and so-called evil. It's also that there are ideas which are subscribed to today quite a lot, because we've developed a certain kind of standardization of thought and values, which we call civilization. And it's got more and more over recent centuries, and as a result we've developed an ever-increasing need to pigeonhole things in certain ways, which makes us feel intellectually or cosmologically comfortable. And good and evil, or good and bad, are very convenient boxes to put things into as a way of dealing with an ever-increasingly complex universe, which we're discovering more and more of as we go through modern time. And this expanding universe which we're presented with, this big bang of issues which we've become aware of, particularly since the real dawn of the mass media age, which you could say was perhaps after the First World War, starting properly after the First World War. There's been this sort of big bang of concepts going hell for leather at the moment, and there are as many new ideas to take in as you can take in. It's going faster than any of us can hope to fully encompass, which is quite exciting, really. It's kind of almost a historical catharsis of ideas and also of change, which is going on in a very chaotic kind of way. The thing is, though, that there is something which we could call goodness, and there is something which we could call evilness. Goodness, I guess if we file it down to its kind of basic components, has something to do with being in harmony with the general overall scheme of things. And according to usual metaphysical thinking, if one is in harmony with the larger scheme of things, then things unfold and things develop and grow and complete and work through in very, very wonderful ways. Lao Tzu was particularly one who focused on that particular aspect of things. He looked on the life process and on reality as a flow, the Tao, which goes through all sorts of changes and modulations in all sorts of different ways, and that by knowing the nature of the Tao, knowing the nature of change, and by aligning ourselves to it as well as we can, thereby problems are overcome, and thereby solutions are found, and thereby whole states can function well. the basic Taoist Confucian idea of things was that the emperor had a relationship with celestial forces, or the celestial emperor, to fulfill, and then the mandarins had a relationship to fulfill with the emperor, and then members of society had a relationship to fulfill towards the mandarins, or the government of the empire, and then all of the individuals within families and communities had particular relationships towards the heads of families and this kind of thing. And it was a very worked out kind of system of developing some sort of harmony with the universal flow. So in a way, goodness is something which leads to results, to outcomes which are in some way experienced to be favorable to us. And that favorableness is not necessarily in a narrow sense of me winning and you losing, or anything like that, me getting rich. It's more in the sense of the fullness of life, going okay, going well, which is something we always crave. We spend all our lives trying to fix our lives so that it'll go okay, and so that we cease being part of the problem and start being part of the solution, sort of thing. And we put a lot of energy into this. It's perpetual. It goes on day after day. It's the first thing we think of when we wake up in the morning quite often. So this question of aligning ourselves to what can you call it, the Tao, to the nature of spirit, to the way of change, to nature, to the essence of things, to messages from our heart, whatever. Aligning ourselves to this generally tends to make life easier and better and more productive all round. There's a certain kind of magic to it, which you'll notice sometimes when you really seem to be on a roll in life. And it's just like all the traffic lights turn green just as you're approaching them, and you meet people in very, very interesting ways, and all of the right ingredients slot into place, and things that you do seem to fulfill a function for other people very well as well. And everything just seems to work right until we start thinking about it and complicating things. Those kinds of things can happen. And this is something which it is necessary and advisable to develop more as a habit, so that we come into a new kind of stability in living in a new reality, a reality which is much more dimensional and elastic and magic and free and colourful and feelingful. So that's what I understand to be goodness anyway. The interesting thing is that goodness isn't necessarily comfortable or easy. It's truth. It's reality. It's what you get. And how we interpret what is going on for us in our lives is a very major issue here. It makes the difference between happiness and disaster. Completely, it is how we interpret, how we grasp what's happening to us, what we read into it. And this makes all the difference between happiness and feeling despondent. So goodness can sometimes appear to be things which go against us. And we're then challenged to look at things in a completely different way in order to perceive the actual goodness that is there. If, for example, you work on the basis that if anything happens to you in your life, it must have meaning. If you work on that basis, then everything which happens to you is good. Right? So then the question comes, right, how are you dealing with it? I mean, how do we interpret these things? What do we read into them? And how long does it take us to get what's happening? Huh? Which is always to do with some sort of change of perspective, some sort of shift of center. So you can get cancer, and that can be the greatest thing that ever happened to you in your life. It's often to do with feeling your reality to the fullest. Like if you get ill, then feel the feelings that go with it, because the more you're able to feel the feelings, the more they come up and out, and the less they matter in the long term. And you can get on with the business, sort of thing. So it's not really an editing matter. If anything, it's an opening up matter, where we're turning up the volume on our inner energy, our inner process. We're making life more intense, and if necessary, more uncomfortable at times. And we're looking at things in a real way. Most of us, for example, we're programmed up with the idea of, I wish I had more money, or I wish I had more something. And we look at a rich or a powerful person, perhaps, or a gifted person, and we identify with that person, and we wish we were like them in some way. And it's not like that. Because if you're extremely gifted, or if you have 10 million or anything, as lottery winners have been finding out, it doesn't make you happy. It just changes things around. That's all. And whether you're claiming the dole or whether you've got a private helicopter doesn't really actually make any difference with regards to happiness. It's how we make use of those circumstances and how we interpret our life as we have it, which is such a key to not only our happiness but also our capacity to go with the flow of things. So we're seeing things as they're unfolding, at least as quick as we can. I'm not talking about everyone as being perfect and super aware people. I'm just thinking about how we can train ourselves to get it that bit faster each time. There's a point where you can detect the first symptom of a cold, for example. There's a particular feeling when you're just about to get ill, and if you're tuned into it, you know it when it happens. And if you do the right things at that moment, you're not ill. But if you disregard it, you fall in some way, and other things take over. So this is a question of getting closer to grasping what is actually happening at any moment. So this is quite interesting. So the business of goodness, for example, is not necessarily the easiest or what we might expect or plan to be the most pleasant kind of thing. It can come in all sorts of guises. And similarly also, the great gifts and the great wonders of life can also have their cost. So the rather narrow judgments of good and bad become either inoperative, or at least we have to not give them the same credibility as we perhaps once gave them. Because reality is so elastic and things change so much. The Saxon mystical notion of weird is very interesting. Weird. Because weird is rather like the Tao as well. It's the flow. But the issue about weird in particular is one of the translations of that is twisting, or the twist. The way in which things turn upside down. In how reality can turn on its head quite quickly. And the funny thing is that as soon as it has done so, we kind of tend to behave as if it's always been like that. So, good can have many guises, but it does have something to do with the unfolding process of the universe, and anything which is, inverted commas, good, presumably hastens and allows and encourages the unfolding of the universe, the release of the inevitable, in many senses, or the taking of plunges. For example, history, looked at from a certain psycho-spiritual viewpoint, is a battle between different psychological tendencies in human consciousness, and the way in which those psychological tendencies are embodied in the different interest groups and ethnic groups and social groups and characters and figures and situations of society and of history. And all of these things get acted out. History is an enormous kind of role-play game involving billions of people. And from this viewpoint, we humans reach choice points. And these are choice points of different levels of intensity, different levels of dimensionality. There are major and minor ones. It's a choice as to whether to pass a law or not. Can be all sorts of things. Humanity is offered a choice point. And there is the awareness abroad that if we don't choose now, it sets off a series of events which, in a way, remove our choice, and in a way can create outcomes which we might not be happy about. And so there's a kind of a semi-conscious need to put issues under the microscope and make them into a social debate, a social issue. Anyway, let's have a look at evil. Now, the way I look at this, and I give thanks actually for having been involved in Buddhism for a decade, because they don't have concepts of good and evil and things like that, and they don't have God in the same way that we know it and things, and it's a wonderful way of de-schooling yourself from Western metaphysical thinking. But from a larger viewpoint, there isn't any such thing as evil, because essentially the universe is all one, and the creative power which has set the universe into motion, there is no question as to what is going to happen in the long term with the universe. The universe will complete its whole multidimensional cycle of existence, and everything will get sorted out. This is absolutely true. This is basic stuff, in a sense. In other words, anything which starts comes to an end, and anything which has existence has meaning in some way. And there is some sort of sense to it all, even if we don't, most of the time, perceive it. So, this being so, if we were to acknowledge the existence of such a thing as evil, it exists in a smaller sense than the creative power, the central intelligence, the cosmic heart of the universe, whatever that is, God, it, Allah. It exists in a lesser sense because the Creator embodies and encompasses all that exists, or that creative principle, however you view it, the universe. So, what would evil be then if it does exist? It would presumably be the corollary of goodness. In other words, it's anything which seeks to make things difficult, essentially, to block flows, to shut down creative developments, to make things unbeautiful, to give people the horrors, to disempower. It's those kinds of things. If you look at it as a reflection of the unfolding creative power of the universe, as a kind of a counterbalancing force. Now, the interesting thing here is there's another clarification that's necessary here, because we often talk about light and dark, and these two terms, like good and bad, they're bandied abroad like nobody's business, and people use this to create excuses to do all sorts of things, whether they're holy or they're horrible, or a mixture of both. And light and dark Perhaps yang and yin are perhaps the best terms, because there's no value judgment to yang or yin. It's a totally imported concept from China, and we have no value judgment attached to it, and neither did the Chinese. We do have a bit of a confusion over light and dark, though, because in some sense we think light is good and dark is bad, or something. Although in another sense, if we think a bit harder about it, we do recognize that light and dark are necessary parts of all experience, of all life. So what's this mix-up, actually? What's that all about? Where's the unclarity here? Especially, for example, if you identify, for example, the light with the male and the dark with the female, and then if you're a female and you're thinking about what's the essence of female life? What is female spirit? What is goddess? What am I as a divine being in my own female self? And you've got to come to terms with this notion of darkness and realize what it really is. We all do. And there's two different kinds of darkness here. One is the hidden area within. It's a world or a set of worlds of its own right. It's a place which we visit in our imagination and in our dreams. It's something which we sense when we're walking down a dark, leafy lane at night. Sort of that frisson of something, which we can't put our finger on, but it can sometimes make us run. It's got that power. Or it can put us into quite an altered state quite quickly. It's what men meet when they get involved with women as well. It's a deeper, hidden, shady, mysterious, unfathomable depth. And men who don't get into contact with this, and women who don't get into contact with this, have essentially dry and shallow lives, which are under-fulfilled. It's carcinogenic. And sometimes this can be scary too. I mean, this is where, amongst other things, dragons and witches and hooting owls and bats live. And the media play on these images quite a lot. And it's a place where great treasure is to be found. It's a whole area of therapy and healing, to go down into the depths, to find your nuggets of gold, the secrets, the truths which are found in your deepest, darkest, lowest moments. Like when you're ill and you're just out of your body and you're suffering, and if you go with it, you can go into a really deep down place. Or if you really are suffering misfortune, and you really get down into the dumps, those of you who've been depressives, for example, that rather unique, highly charged feeling that you get when you're totally internalized and you're completely, you can't even communicate with other people. You don't even know what's going on. Those kinds of times. Those are the dark times, and yet from those times come visions. They can come our most profound moments of truth. From those times can come the turnaround. The light at the end of the tunnel. It's the dark night of the soul. Now this is an entirely important area, and people on a spiritual path who deny this inevitably come a cropper, essentially because it creeps up behind them anyway, and it acts out of them anyway. You see it in its most extreme forms in terms of religious fanaticism, and we all do it in different ways. We all go through our Holy Joe phases and start damning all those others who smell of fish and chips or smoke a cigarette. We have to acknowledge all of these areas. So, darkness is in a way two kinds of things. There's that healthy kind of darkness I was talking about before, which is an inherent part of reality. We live, for example, on a planet where for roughly half the day it is dark, and roughly half the day it is light. And therefore our souls have chosen to be in a kind of existence which interplays these two things of darkness and light. If we didn't want to be involved in that particular movie, we'd live on another planet which didn't have that day-night seasonal business. So we've elected to be involved as souls in a particular kind of world where we get this alternation. And in a country like Britain, which is quite a seasonal country, we elect to get an emphasized whack of it as well. You know? And so this oscillation between the light and the dark is an interplay. It's the yin and the yang which are interwoven into each other. And the seed of each other is in the center of the other one. You know, they are so interwoven. So there's that, but there's another aspect too. There's imbalanced light and dark. There's light or dark which do not recognize the existence of the other. And this is where we come to the question of evil. Because evil, in a sense, it's a way in which life energy and creativity get themselves blocked up in some way. And how are they blocked up? They're on Earth, and amongst us kinds of people, there are two major regulators of this, two major deciding factors. One's called fear, and the other one is called guilt. Guilt's about the past, and fear is about the future, essentially. Guilt is our reminder mechanism, which reminds us perpetually of ways in which we have erred, the ways in which we've gone against the flow in some way, and thereby created certain outcomes which we land up regretting. Now, fear arises out of the notion that there is me. This is me, and I am a separate being, and the most important thing in my life is the protection of me and the furtherance of me, essentially. This is the programming we're brought up with. Our whole civilization is geared to this. And anyone who doesn't subscribe to that is regarded as a loony or a fool or some kind of saint. But us lot, we don't believe those kinds of things. Me comes first, essentially. And even if we're on a growth path, this is true. There is such a thing also as imbalanced light and imbalanced darkness. And the thing about imbalanced darkness we see all around us in the world today. So, however, the problem is that if a person gets hurt in life, if life deals them a hard deal, and there's a lot of that around, in fact, every single person gets dealt a hard deal in some way or another. And we get hurt. And if we get hurt to a certain degree, there's a point where we go inside ourselves into a kind of a vortex of self-awareness, self-interest, where basically it's fight or die. And when we get into that kind of space, and all of us do it at different times in big and small ways, you know. When we get into that, we lose perspective of the larger scheme of things, and we fail to understand where other people are coming from. We fail to understand what's really going on. We're going off on a sidetrack in some way, but we believe that it's so important, or that we're right, or that everyone else is wrong, or something. You know? And that loss of perspective is, you could say, imbalanced darkness. It's getting caught up in your stuff to such a degree that you really get lost. You really lose your sense of proportion. Now, our sense of proportion is something which comes up every now and then, and it says, I've been through these kinds of things before, and I made it last time, so it'll be all right somehow now. You know, like, well, no matter what happens, isn't it really nice that birds still sing? You know, or something like that. Or something in you just knows, I've got to take a rest. Better look after myself. And it's those kinds of things, it's where your soul's coming up and saying, ta-dang, come on, you know, change. Do that twist. Now frequently, we're confronted with the situation where there we are motoring along in our lives, and we've got all our explanations lined up about what we are doing and what we are intending to do and why all this has to be like it how it is. And so there we are motoring along, and then it goes wrong, bang, 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 in some way. It doesn't go right. And then we start lashing out, and then we start lashing in, and we can get ourselves into a mess. And that kind of loss of perspective is, if anything, precisely that evil which I'm trying to get my fingers on. It's precisely that evil. Now how? It's because when you're in a state like that, you can do anything. You'd regret it later on, but in that moment you can do anything. You know, you can do crazy things, you can say things, you can think things, you can act in ways which were avoidable, and in ways which you know are going to create outcomes that you don't want to have happen. It can be the smallest move when you're driving your car, or it can be something in your relationship with your son and daughter, or your husband or wife, and you just say one thing, and then you think, damn, and you try and skip it over, but something's changed. We've got to a situation with our government, for example, and with many, many public figures, where they've made so many blunders and so many faux pas and so many visible lies and all this kind of thing, that people become really hardened to the whole thing. So each time there's a new version of the same old stuff, everyone just goes, oh, well, it's just more of the same old stuff, isn't it? Yeah. And this develops into a kind of an apathy or a disenchantment which can actually affect the choices of millions. And so we, in these kinds of situations, we can omit to make choices which would actually make us happy and glad. Making choices, we've made a whole institution out of it, such that even our Prime Minister can initiate an election which changes nothing. You know, and we all just think, yes, well, it's more of the same, isn't it? We don't even complain. And so we can get ourselves into a state where we forget what we're doing throughout our history, where we allow ourselves to subscribe to something we know is a lie, in the way of all manner of different social beliefs which we live by at this particular time. We subscribe to all sorts of notions which are, in the end, regrettable. And so, nations and the human race can go bananas. I mean, Gurdjieff used to call humanity mad machines. You know, that's to say, we behave like machines, but there's absolutely no logic to it at all. And in many respects, he was quite right. For example, the fact that essentially the majority of the human race do know that we are plummeting towards great danger. We know that. We have known it for 30 years. It has been in the public domain. You haven't had to be particularly intellectual or well-informed to know that. You in fact just need to look at the sky and observe, and look at the streets, get a sense of the feelings of other people. You don't even need to be into current affairs. It's perfectly possible to smell the air, you know. And so we know that this is the case. We know, when we think about it, that we are leaving a terrible inheritance to our children and grandchildren. We know, and some part of us accepts that. And this is not just the enlightened people in the world, it's I would say a majority of people in the world who somewhere in their being know and accept this. However, we are schizoid. We live a double life in many ways. I'm speaking for the public as a whole. We live a double life where frequently we will entertain a belief but behave differently. Now, this is a psychological mechanism which allows us to get away with things that we would actually regret. However, it doesn't work in the long term, because sooner or later reality presents us with situations which grate against our worldview. And certain things which come up in the world, in our current affairs, can be symbolically tremendously potent things. So, one of the characteristics of our time, therefore, is that we do kind of know what the situation is, but the trouble is we don't know where to start, or we're afraid to start, or someone's waiting for someone else to start, or something. Perhaps we're waiting for such a compromising world situation that we're forced to act. Perhaps that's what we're waiting for. You know, because the trouble is that if suddenly someone woke up and said, "Look, folks, love your neighbours and let's change the world," you know, they'd get shot or disbelieved or something like that, and essentially they would be challenging us to recognize that we have wittingly gone through centuries avoiding truth. And that's a very, very difficult thing to come to grips with. That is an apocalypse. That is a revelation of enormous proportions. So in a way, we'd prefer unconsciously to wait for the big one, which presumably will wake us up, and presumably will react well to it and make use of it. This is the hope. I would encourage you actually to spend some time fantasizing about the different aspects of the different possibilities for the future, both bad scenarios and good scenarios, and also somewhere in between. It's a really important thing to do at this time, just to look at the options, get more of a sense of what the choices are. The majority of the human race is not evil. The majority of the human race is perfectly decent and okay. There's a lot of very hurt people who do things as a result of that, but they're not necessarily bad-hearted. And there's a lot of people who might have a chip on their shoulder or an axe to grind, but they're not necessarily, when the chips are down, they're not necessarily bad people. I mean, the problem really is, it's more that the human race is hurt. Everyone is so hurt. It's going to take quite a lot of healing. People in the world who genuinely are moved to make things seriously worse seem to me to be quite a small proportion of people. And the problem here is that there are some people who motivate this, and there are many, many people, if not most of us, if not all of us, who perpetuate it. We have to make these moral choices about to what extent do I compromise my integrity in order to survive in the society and the system I live in as defined at this moment. So the question here then is that in a certain manner a very, very small number of people can have a surprisingly large effect on the rest of humanity. And the thing is that they can do so simply by reactivating old habitual programs which we have allowed ourselves to become habituated to, like fear and guilt, essentially. And we are faced with a time at the moment where that is coming very, very sharply into focus, and life is saying to the human race as a whole, okay, well, you can either step forward or you can die and suffer a lot. Which do you want to do? It's quite, it renders things quite simple, actually. It renders the choice rather choiceless, but in another way we've got to make it, sooner or later. But we keep on leaving it. How much can we actually afford to carry on with our wage debt society, with our overconsumption, with our ignoring the big question? How long can we keep this act up? And what does it hang on? It actually hangs on this question. For the triumph of evil, it is necessary only that good people do nothing. Essentially, it's a really pertinent notion for our day, and it was spoken by a person who was alive in the period just before the French and American revolutions. He said that around that time, which was a time of rising hope and aspiration. Liberté, égalité, fraternité.